Before our keynote speaker offers her thoughts to us, I would like to first invite all of you to stand and welcome our co-moderators, Cindy Coleman and Bill-Marie Citron Olivieri. And we are so grateful that they are here, and they would like to offer us a few words of greeting.
Thank you so much. Please be seated. As I was sitting here listening and knowing those who are being honored today, all I could think is that I'm here among giants. I feel like a toddler who's looking at the kneecaps of people who are striding ahead, and I'm still learning so much, and I'm toddling behind, wanting to follow. So thank you. Thank you for the ways you lead. Thank you for the ways you have pushed and prodded. Thank you for the ways that sometimes, using the words of Jesus, you have come not to bring peace but a sword. Because sometimes we need not violent action, but the action of peace that pushes, that demands, that is strong and not weak. It is an honor to stand in your midst and to follow as you lead us in, as you have heard, bold and prophetic ways.
I'm also encouraged by the fact, as I listened to my sister talking about the things that passed in Committee 11. Committee 11 passed Commissioner's Resolution 1122, which calls for an action from this General Assembly, and it passed unanimously, to take care of our Puerto Rico, to take care of those laws that hinder, that block, that stop the much-needed help that our people, our U.S. citizens in the island of Puerto Rico need. It was interesting to me, somebody asked me, how can you stand as a co-moderator if you're a ruling elder, first of all, and then if you are from Puerto Rico? And I said, you know, the PCUSA in Puerto Rico is the PCUSA here. It is the same church. And I stand for tropical Florida, that's a whole other story. But yeah, I don't know, a person was misinformed. But I'm a proud Puerto Rican, born and raised in the colony, because that's what it is. And yes, we need to call things by their name. And we are called to have a spirit of anti-colonialism. So I was overjoyed and humbled to be able to speak on favor of that Commissioner's Resolution brought by the people in Puerto Rico, by the Church in Puerto Rico, and it passed unanimously. So thank you so much for the work you do. We bring greetings in the name of this General Assembly, 223rd, and we hope to continue to work closely to further the cause of peace. Thank you.
Cindy and I had lunch 2 weeks ago in this little diner. We have a secret place we meet. We cover the New Englands in Presbyterian leaderships. And Bill-Marie, thank you for your words, and Cindy, thank you for yours. We know you have to go on to other things. Thank you for your leadership, and we wish you blessings, abundant blessings, in the next 2 years on your co-mod journey throughout the PCUSA and the world. So it is my joy today to tell you a little bit about our sister, the Reverend T. Denise Anderson. Denise is co-moderator, just finished up her term a few days ago of the 222nd General Assembly. She is also the pastor of Unity Presbyterian Church in Temple Hills, Maryland. Denise was born in Oxford, England, raised in Georgia and Virginia. She is a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, where she studied art and African American studies. She received her Master of Divinity from Howard University School of Divinity, and she was recognized for excellence in Hebrew Bible studies and overall academic achievement. She had served as the English language minister at the Taiwanese Presbyterian Church of Greater Washington before being called to serve at Unity. In a historic election 2 years ago, Denise became the first Presbyterian Church USA General Assembly co-moderator, along with the Reverend Dr. Jan Edmonston. That was in 2016. During their term, Jan and Denise furthered the justice and mission work of our denomination with their anti-racism training and organizing around the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Denise is a writer whose work has appeared in the Christian Century, Presbyterian Outlook, Huffington Post, among many other publications. She also blogs at Sola Scriptura. If you have not looked at her blog, I encourage you very much to do that. Sola Scriptura, to be young, gifted, and reformed. She is a community organizer, a voice for justice. She serves on the Maryland Coordinating Committee of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Denise lives in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, with her husband Carter, who is also here. We want to also thank Carter for his deep service and accompaniment of the Presbyterian Church over these last 2 years. Thank you so much, Carter. Her daughter, Layla. And I would be remiss if I did not say that Denise and Carter and Layla have a new member of their family in the last few months. It is a kitten. I have seen a gazillion pictures of the kitten. I understand that the kitten, she has taken over the whole house and she has installed herself as queen of the house. Denise, we are so honored to have you here with us. We are grateful for your voice. We are grateful for your prophetic leadership. And we are so deeply blessed to be co-workers with you in the larger ministry of the Presbyterian Church USA. Please stand and join me in welcoming the Reverend Denise Anderson as our keynote speaker.
And to all of you who got up at the crack of dawn, I'll try not to hold you long, which if you know anything about black preachers, that's a total lie. So let's get into it. I want to start with a word of scripture, if you would, from Mark chapter 2, verse 23, going on to chapter 3, verse 6. Listen now for the word of the Lord. One Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for anyone but the priest to eat, and he gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at the hardness of their heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Friends, I address us all this morning from the topic, Not One Step Back, King's Unfinished Agenda and Why We Still Cannot Wait. You know, I was asked to step into this moment in place of our sister and brother, the Reverend Doctors Liz Theo Harris and William Barber, and they were scheduled to talk about the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival. And as you know, Jan and I made PCUSA engagement in that campaign a major focus of our work during our term. And I'm so grateful for all of you who raised your hands saying that you have been organizers and participants in acts of civil disobedience and nonviolent moral fusion direct action. Thank you so much for that. And there was a reason why we organized this denomination around that campaign, and that was because of an overture that came at last General Assembly from the Presbytery of Campaigns on choosing to be a church committed to the gospel of Matthew 25. And that overture said that we as a church were to recommit ourselves at the congregational level, the mid-council level, and the national levels of our church to locate ourselves with the poor, to advocate with all of our voice for the poor, and to seek opportunities to take risks for and with the poor. And at the same time that that overture came before our General Assembly, there was a growing grassroots movement, a call to revive the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign ahead of the 50th anniversary of its launch. One of those who was calling for that revival was the Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, who you've honored today, a Presbyterian minister, and who we heard from at the beginning of this assembly. Now, currently, our campaign boasts presences in nearly 40 states around the country. And I'm pleased to serve on the Maryland Coordinating Committee. And we are in the midst, as it was stated, of a 40-day season of non-violent moral fusion direct action with weekly actions of civil disobedience around these foci: poverty, systemic racism, militarism and the war economy, ecological devastation, and the distorted moral narrative. And you cannot talk about one of these things without talking about all of them. During week 3 of this season, I submitted to arrest as we conducted a die-in inside of the Maryland State House in Annapolis to bring attention to the impact of militarism and the war economy, and by extension, gun violence on the nation and world's poorest. Now, as I shared on my social media account, for those of you who are friends with me, I died in as a daughter of 2 veterans who devoted more than 2 decades each to this country. I died in because they grew up poor Americans, and enlisting in the military was one of very few options available to poor black people at the time. I died in because I once had to rush my veteran mama to the hospital in the middle of the night as she struggled with her gallbladder, and TRICARE wanted her to wait 2 weeks to be seen. I died in because I'm a former defense contractor myself who would work side by side with people who wore the uniform, and I would run into them at McDonald's or Home Depot later on, and they weren't shopping or eating, friends, they were working their second jobs. They were getting paid much less than I was, and they were doing a lot more, but my employer was getting rich. I died in because DC area veterans are among some of the best paid in the country, but they can only afford about 20% of the houses on the market in the DC area. Veterans in San Jose, California can't afford any on the market there. I died in because Maryland's gun violence problem is inextricable from its poverty problem. I died in for the countless poor citizens corralled into jails on minor non-violent offenses only to stay there indefinitely because they cannot afford bail, and that's why I marched yesterday. I died in for the 2% of active duty military who rely on food stamps to feed themselves and their family. I died in because the war economy is killing us in more ways than we know. In conjunction with the Institute for Policy Studies, the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival put out just a few months ago an extensive look at poverty today called The Souls of Poor Folk. Auditing America 50 years after the Poor People's Campaign challenged racism, poverty, the war, economy, militarism, and our national morality. Now, the Souls of Poor Folk audit traces the 50 years since 1968 when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and thousands of Americans, alarmed at their government's blindness to human need, launched the Poor People's Campaign. It is an empirical study that paints a startling picture of just how far we have yet to come in the last 50 years. If you want to take a look at that campaign, at that report, at that audit, please go to poorpeoplescampaign.org. But let me rewind for a second. About a year before Jen and I were elected as General Assembly co-moderators, I attended an event at Montreat Conference Center called Dr. King's Unfinished Agenda. The event was hosted as a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of King's historical and at the time controversial visit and address to Montreat at its Christian Action Conference. At that commemorative event, we would hear from Charles Blow and Leonard Pitts, from William Barber and Congressman John Lewis and Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie in what can only be described as a transformational, inspiring, and enlightening experience. We came away from that event reinvigorated and determined to further the cause of justice. Dr. King's Unfinished Agenda, however, was but one of a series of 50th anniversary commemorations that I would attend or participate in the life of Dr. King. You know, I would take my daughter to the National Mall for the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. I would watch from a distance the reenactment of the march from Selma, and as we prepared to launch the Poor People's Campaign, we did so with the 50th anniversary of King's original campaign and subsequent assassination in view. And you know what? I still fancy myself a young woman, friends. I don't even know what 50 years looks like. I don't even yet know what 40 years looks like. But I do know that for some things, 50 years is too damn long to wait for anything. In his book, Why We Can't Wait, King talked about the significance of the year 1963 and the apparent awakening of the Black community that the country was experiencing at the time. He posed the rhetorical question of why 1963 specifically would be the year in which we would see what he called the Negro Revolution, and why the country would have to come to grips with the sustained direct actions we were seeing across the nation. Now, simply put, at that point in history, it had been 100 years since President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Yesterday, we marched to deliver over $47,000 to bail out people charged with nonviolent offenses who would have otherwise languished in jail until their trial because they couldn't afford bail. What else was significant about yesterday? Juneteenth. Yesterday was Juneteenth. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed by Lincoln on January 1st in 1863. That it effectively but not functionally abolished slavery in the Confederate States of America. It wasn't until April 9th of 1865, however, that General Lee would surrender to Union forces, ending the Civil War and the slave economy as we knew it. And it still would not be until later that year that Confederate soldiers fighting in Texas would learn finally that the war was over. On June 19th, Union General Granger would arrive in Galveston, Texas, and announce the manumission of the slaves there. And from then on, the day would be commemorated and given the portmanteau Juneteenth. But we must ask the question, friends, all these years later, why are our siblings still not free? The 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed by the Senate on January 31st, 1865, and it abolished slavery except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. What that means is that if we wanted to make money off of human bodies, we now had to criminalize those bodies and find a reason, any reason, to incarcerate them. Slavery was abolished, but the slave economy never went anywhere. It just put on new clothes. What is most egregious about the cash bail system is that these siblings incarcerated within it haven't even been convicted of anything yet. What it does is criminalize poverty, because if you're picked up on a minor offense and you can't afford to pay the fine, you are immediately in violation of the law, even though it's impossible to get blood from a turnip. That means that siblings with already limited means are caged until they can magically come up with funds they definitely can't get while they're sitting in a jail cell because they can't go to work. Again, I ask you, how long are we supposed to wait to get free? Mass incarceration and the human rights affront that is the cash bail system isn't by any means new. It's simply an old devil in new clothes. People have a curious tendency, friends, to treat old grievances as new menaces. I believe that we for far too long have valued nicety over honesty, and have conflated the absence of conflict with the presence of peace. And then suddenly, when someone has the audacity to remind us that we are in fact in their way, that our boot is on their neck, that their space is encroached by us, we act shocked, shaken, and turn on them for jolting us out of our sense of contentment. Sometimes we have this curious tendency to bristle when somebody simply points out what has always been the case, as if racism suddenly appeared the moment we got a black president and the dominant culture started to get uneasy. As if Colin Kaepernick wasn't protesting something that hadn't existed for years and years and years. As if toxic waste hadn't been dumped in poor, brown, and indigenous communities ad infinitum. How long are they supposed to wait to speak up for themselves? I have to consult the text for what I need to say to you today. And I'm reminded of a story that I believe is one of the most important and most ignored accounts of Jesus' life and teachings. It is Saturday, the Sabbath day, and he and his followers are walking through the grain fields, and as humans are wont to do when they are walking long distances, friends who did that walk, sometimes you get a little peckish. Amen. So they began to pluck some of the heads of grain just to feed themselves. Oh, but wait, it's the Sabbath. Ooh. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. It's the law. The law is pretty clear on that. So the Pharisees challenge him about why they're doing this. Jesus then takes that opportunity to reframe the understanding of not only the Sabbath, but the entire law for a people who had apparently missed the point of both. He uses his ancestor David and recalls the story from 1 Samuel 21 when David was fleeing Saul and begged the priest for some bread, but all the priest had in his possession was the consecrated bread, but he gave it to David and his men anyway. The priest and Jesus understood that consecrated effects become idols when we put more importance in them than in our fellow human beings. For whom was the Sabbath made? If the Sabbath was made as a restorative gift for humans, and yet we fail to restore humans on the Sabbath, we dishonor the Sabbath. What's interesting is that Jesus' detractors thought he was going about things the wrong way, and Jesus thought his detractors were going about things the wrong way. And you know what? Both were kind of right in a sense. The Pharisees were right in saying that it was unlawful to work on the Sabbath. There's no question about that. However, in the end, whose approach fostered healing? Whose approach engendered liberation? The approach that heals the broken, feeds the hungry, liberates those in bondage. That is the right approach, because that's the righteous approach. Friends, Jesus calls us to righteousness and not religiousness. actually important for us Presbyterians to remember. We fancy ourselves as people of decency and order. All things decent and in order, parliamentary procedure, Robert's rules, right alongside the Bible, decency and order, point of order. God, you will hear that so many times. We love our decency and order, but friends, sometimes you can achieve order and miss out on decency. Sometimes our adherence to order is really an exercise in maintaining our privilege. And you know, privilege is a pacifying thing. Now imagine a baby mindlessly enjoying a pacifier, and she just is quiet and content and probably unaware that the pacifier is even in her mouth, but try jiggling that pacifier. Try disturbing the pacifier's position or wresting it from her toothless mouth. All hell breaks loose. She's inconsolable. She doesn't yet have the tools to address her discomfort in that moment. Too many of us are reluctant to do the work and say the words of justice out of fear of jiggling somebody's pacifier. But I need you to listen to me and listen to me good, friends. Let them cry. They will be all right. It's going to be okay. It's not going to kill them. We can never be the church God is calling us to be if we're too timid and afraid to be uncomfortable. Our order should never become our idol. Order should never be an end to itself. It's supposed to serve the interests of the community. Now, at its best, our order calls us to remember our own ethics. Order should always be simultaneously followed and interrogated. And if the time comes when order begins to serve itself rather than people, then the people have a responsibility to call order back to itself. Friends, when have we favored order over decency? When have we expected people to be silent about their pain so as not to disturb our peace? Don't answer that question, just think about it. You know, King would lament in his letter from a Birmingham jail that the biggest obstacle to justice in Birmingham, in America, and in the world were those who loved order more than they loved righteousness. He would write, I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. He could have written this in 2018. Jesus was angry at the hardness of the hearts of those in the synagogue, the house of worship, when they were faced with the question of whether or not to heal a man with an injured hand on the Sabbath. Their apparent indifference or intractable need to be right rather than useful rendered them silent and ineffective in the face of somebody who needed to be healed. That made Jesus angry. It should make us angry. When you know that since 2010, 23 states have passed racist voter suppression laws, including racist gerrymandering and redistricting, then you know why we still can't wait. When you know that wages for the bottom 80% of the population have been stagnant since the 1970s, and that there is no state or county in the nation where someone earning the federal minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment at market rent, then you know why we still can't wait. When you know that there are 32 million people who lack health insurance and an estimated 40% of Americans who have taken on debt as a result of getting sick, then production and transportation too often threatens the water supplies of the poorest communities, then you know why we still can't wait. When you know that systemic racism allows us to divorce people of their humanity, and that is how we are able to wage economic and military wars. When you understand the dog whistles of calling people at the border animals, then you know why we still can't wait. When you know that the displacement of peoples in North America, in Palestine, and the world over is largely motivated by the fact that they are living over aquifers that other people want access to, then you know why we still can't wait. When you know that the oceans are rising and poor communities are drowning, then you know why we still can't wait. When you know that we have waited far too long for promises made far too long ago, then you know why we still can't wait. When you know that the mother of peace is justice, you stop trying to circumvent the mother to get to the child. Jesus saw injustice and he got angry. We should get angry, friends. And yet in Jesus' anger, he didn't sin. In his anger, he healed. In his anger, he delivered. In his anger, he advocated. In his anger, he saved. In his anger, he toppled exploitative economic systems. In his anger, he commanded justice to come forth. Jesus would continue to be a thorn in the side of those who loved order more than they loved people. He would challenge the hypocrisy of his own community. He would heal not just on the Sabbath, but any and every day that somebody needed to be healed. He would proclaim the kingdom of his Father and the forgiveness of sins. He wouldn't condemn, he would liberate. He wouldn't ignore, he would see people right where they are. And yet there are those who would try to distort his message and his narrative. They would call him a heretic. They would say he was trying to replace Caesar. They would accuse him of blasphemy and sedition. They would demand his crucifixion. They would nail him on a cross and cast lots for his clothes. They would watch him die an agonizing and unjust death, but they would not win. Because 3 days later, he would get up with all power in his hands. He would get up with all power to the people. He would get up and move forward. And as he moves forward, he moves us forward. As he moves us forward, he empowers us to move others forward. In the movement, we say forward together, not one step back. I need to hear you say it. Forward together, not one step back. One more time. Forward together, not one step back. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. If we don't get it, 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 if we don't